Right now, though, we are going to stay in that region at 9 o'clock on the East Coast and 6 o'clock on the West Coast. As of right now, the president of Iran says that he's open to talks with the U.S., and that could happen later this week in Istanbul. Iran's president saying earlier today that he instructed the country's foreign minister to, quote, pursue fair and equitable negotiations with the U.S. And you can see a lengthy response there coming in from the president as we watch all of this kind of play out and have been over the past several weeks. Now, tensions, no doubt, do remain high there after Iran's crackdown on those nationwide protests that you see in the video here. That was last month, during which activists say more than 6,000 people were killed, and that number could potentially be even higher. The comments from Iran's president come after this weekend's threat from the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, saying a U.S. attack on Iran would lead to a, quote, regional war. U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff will be in the Middle East this week, with several countries invited to attend talks between the two countries if they happen. I want to bring in Jason Brodsky, policy director at United Against Nuclear Iran, to discuss really what we can expect to happen here, because, again, there is a lot to this. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Great to be with you, Josh. Thanks.
And first off, I want to talk to you a little bit about the remarks there. We saw some lengthy remarks coming in from Iran's president. What do you make of that? Is that kind of a change of pace from what we've seen?
Well, not really. The Islamic Republic would like to lure the United States into an endless negotiating process because the Iranian regime benefits from such a long, protracted process. It offers protection for the regime. It insulates it from a military attack. It props up their economy with their currency plummeting. And also it demoralizes Iranians who have been taking to the streets very bravely, demanding the ouster and the fall of the Islamic Republic. So it would love nothing more than to change the channel and to talk about its nuclear program after the regime committed what many consider to be the largest massacre of Iranians in its contemporary history.
On that note, we heard from President Trump just a few weeks ago as he essentially said that he had spoken with Iranian leadership and they said that they stopped the execution of about 800 people. However, we're hearing from other sources, experts there, that those executions are actually happening. What do we know about all of that?
Those executions continue. The Iranians are being abused by the government. This is nothing new. I think the Iranians wanted to attempt to inject some disinformation into diplomatic channels to provide an off-ramp to avoid and avert a military strike. And so I think we need to be very careful as to what the Iranian leadership is telling the United States. First of all, the president and the foreign minister have no control over the Iranian regime's judiciary. That reports to the supreme leader. And the judiciary officials themselves have even denied that that number is the case. So we can't trust what the Iranian regime delivers in diplomatic channels, and we certainly can't trust what the judiciary is saying either. And there have been very credible independent reports of ongoing abuses happening in the Iranian system.
What about this potential meeting that could take place in Istanbul later on this week? If that happens, does that say anything about maybe where we're headed with those relations between the U.S. and Iran?
I think that this meeting is really going to be like the many other meetings the United States has had to engage in diplomacy with the Islamic Republic. The Iranian leadership, the maximum the Iranian leadership is likely to concede on any diplomatic agreement is unlikely to meet the minimum the United States is prepared to accept. And that cycle will likely continue. Iran has traditionally refused to negotiate over its missile program and also refuses to end its support for its terror proxies. And with those, if the U.S. adheres to those red lines, these negotiations will likely go nowhere.
On that note, you just kind of touched on this, but what are some of the red lines here? What are the negotiating maybe issues when you're talking about the nuclear talks, who's going to accept what the U.S. really wants here? Can you kind of break that down for folks out there?
Sure, there are four. First is that the Trump administration has sought zero enrichment in Iran. Secondly, the Trump administration seeks to remove the stockpile of enriched uranium that was buried under rubble now after the U.S. airstrikes in June 2025 out of the country. Third is the U.S. wants limits on Iran's missile program. And fourth, the U.S. seeks to end Iran's support for terror proxies. The Iranian leadership considers those terms to effectively be regime change by agreement. And so this is a system that will not reform and will not change as long as the current leadership is in place. So we are headed likely towards a stalemate rather than a breakthrough.
What should we take away from, if anything, the U.S. military presence that is now there in Iran? Because President Trump said maybe about a week ago at this point that this, quote, massive armada was headed for Iran. We know that essentially the Lincoln has arrived there. There are other kind of military actions that could potentially take place. So what should we take away from it?
Well, I think that we are having what's happening is the president is engaging in what's called coercive diplomacy. This is an attempt to flash that the military option is very much on the table and to develop a credible military threat while at the same time saying the United States is open to diplomacy. And that is the way traditionally President Trump has dealt with the Iranian regime. Now it has a choice to make, and the president has a documented record of adhering to his red lines, and if the Iranian regime rejects those red lines, for the U.S. to undertake military action against the regime. So they have that demonstrated track record right now. The Iranians used to be skeptical that the U.S. would employ military force, but I think this president has demonstrated a willingness to do so, and so it will be interesting to see how that transpires in Istanbul.
Let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the mediators that are involved in their role. We have Turkey, Qatar, the UAE, a lot of different people that are on that list. What sort of role are they playing right now as mediators?
I think that they're trying to avert U.S. military strikes. I think that what matters is not the mediators. What matters is not the format. What matters are the positions of the United States and Iran. And as I said earlier, the maximum the Iranians are prepared to give continues not to meet the minimum the United States is prepared to accept. And so at the end of the day, that is what's going to make the difference, not the choreography, not the players at the meeting. This is the reality of U.S.-Iran relations.
What about the sanctions that are taking place? What sort of role do they play in all of this? Because you have to imagine that Iran not happy about that.
Well, the sanctions have produced the dire economic situation in Iran. It has collapsed the regime's finances. The regime cannot run the country as a result of the sanctions. And so the sanctions are biting the leadership in a very big way. The sanctions have also deprived the Iranian regime of a lot of revenue it would have otherwise diverted to terror proxies and partners and nefarious and malign purposes around the region. But what matters here is what the Iranians on the streets who have been protesting have been saying. They have come to the conclusion that this regime is irredeemable, can't be reformed, and has to go. And no matter, they're not calling for and chanting for a nuclear deal with the United States. They're chanting for the regime to fall because they know with a nuclear deal, without a nuclear deal, this regime will not change.
The last question here, what should we watch for in the coming hours, days, as all of this plays out? Because again, this meeting potentially expected to take place there in Istanbul later this week.
I would say that the Iranian leadership is very practiced at saying and doing enough to earn another meeting, but not necessarily an agreement. So I would expect them to engage in their usual tricks and tactics to stall and to try to create a protracted negotiations process. And so I would be on the lookout for that. I would assume the U.S. would also put out a readout that said that it was a productive conversation, constructive. And we've heard all this before in the lead up to the 12-day war as well. So I'm quite skeptical about public readouts. What matters, I think, is President Trump setting up the CENTCOM theater of operations. And what matters is whether they get to an agreement, not another meeting.
Jason Ebrodsky, thank you so much for being here with us today. Anything you want to add? Anything we missed here before I let you go?
No, I think that that's it. I just think after 4 decades, we need to come to the conclusion that there will never be a durable diplomatic understanding between the United States and the Iranian leadership as long as this current regime is in power. And Democrats and Republicans need to start accepting that reality.
We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we will keep an eye on the situation here as it plays out. Now, once again, we are expecting that meeting could take place over in Istanbul later this week. We'll keep you updated on Live Now from Fox.